Welcome to ILTV's Israel Weekly, where we discuss the latest in Israel's geopolitical developments. I'm Aaron Porras, and today on our panel we have the founder and executive director of the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies, Dr. Martin Sherman, Akiva Bigman, an investigative journalist at Israel Hayom, Dr. Yossi Beilin, who served in multiple ministerial positions, including as former Minister of Justice, and Jacob Ner David, public council member from the New Israel Fund. Thank you all very much for being here today. Now, the topic of discussion today is the annual Genesis Prize, commonly referred to as the Israeli Nobel, which has been canceled this year as this year's prize winner, Natalie Portman, has now indicated she'll not be attending. The Israeli-American actress, activist, and philanthropist said that the decision is in protest of unspecified policies of the Netanyahu government, and shortly after the announcement, rumors about Portman quickly started to swirl. So here's Portman's full response to the backlash posted to her Instagram page. It reads, quote, "My decision not to attend the Genesis Prize ceremony has been mischaracterized by others. Let me speak for myself. I chose not to attend because I did not want to appear as endorsing Benjamin Netanyahu, who was to be giving a speech at the ceremony. By the same token, I am not part of the BDS movement and I do not endorse it. Like many Israelis and Jews around the world, I can be critical of the leadership in Israel without wanting to boycott the entire nation. I treasure my Israeli friends and family, Israeli food, books, art, cinema, and dance. Israel was created exactly 70 years ago as a haven for refugees from the Holocaust, but the mistreatment of those suffering from today's atrocities is simply not in line with my Jewish values. Because I care about Israel, I must stand up against violence, corruption, inequality, and abuse of power. Please do not take any words that do not come from me directly as my own. This experience has inspired me to support a number of charities in Israel. I'll be announcing them soon, and I hope others will join me in supporting the great work they're doing." End quote. So I'm going to start over here. Yossi, why, is this the first time that the Prime Minister has attended this event? I mean, who's really politicizing this event? The fact that Netanyahu was going to speak there, or the fact that now all this attention is being brought to it because of Natalie Portman's absence?
Well, I must admit that for me it is a very important precedent because it is for the first time that I'm here in order to interpret the movie star expressions and views. So it is an upgrade, I admit, for me personally. She's a private person. She may say whatever she wants, and if she doesn't want to get this prize, so be it. I mean, what happened as a result of it is only because she is very famous, and there is apparently a kind of a phobia around the Prime Minister that something like that maybe, which is apparently very much against him, is against Israel. And this is the policy to say whoever is against Netanyahu is against Israel. If she is against Israel, she is for BDS, and she is anti-Semite and anti-whatever, which is nonsense.
But then isn't it equally nonsense to say that any and all events that the Prime Minister goes to is, if you attend that event, you're supporting the Prime Minister? Isn't that equally kind of
so
false
what?
to say?
So what? I mean, she is not a politician. She is not a stateswoman or whatever, and she's allowed to decide.
The question is how the rest of the world sees it. Let me tell you how Omar Barghouti sees it. Okay, Omar Barghouti, the head of the BDS movement, he said the following about Portman's decision. This latest rebuff to Israeli cultural events and allocades coming from an Israeli-American superstar is arguably one of the strongest indicators yet of how toxic the Israel brand has become, even in some liberal circles in Hollywood. I can sense our South Africa moment coming closer. So this is exactly how the BDS is. And Portman can say what she likes. The very fact that she came there for reasons that are obviously political, because she obviously objects to the election results. One wonders if she'd only visit countries where the election results, if there were any, was something that she approved of. Would she go to Turkey? Would she go to China?
How would you?
Again, she clearly said she's not boycotting Israel. I don't think she is boycotting Israel, and I think she will come here on private.
That's what she says, but
that's
not the perception.
On private trips.
That's not the perception.
Hold on.
Well, you can only go by what she said. But I think also you have to remember.
What Barghouti says.
Dr. Sherman, please.
I think perhaps again we're all doing this Talmudic analysis of her Instagram post, but which is an upgrade. But I think perhaps she's reacting more to Bibi, who's become a lightning rod for a lot of people. Some of it by his own doing, right? So I'm here in part because of my connection to the New Israel Fund. But he attacked the New Israel Fund. The contributions, thank God, went way up. in the days after his attack, which is perhaps it was his intention. But I think the real issue is, you were asking the question, did he attend the prize in the past, and is this
the
a
answer is yes, actually.
no? And is this a politicization of it? I would say Bibi has politicized himself more and more.
Why? How?
By attacking in ways which I think lower the gravitas of the office. Now, thank God we also have a president. So if we want to keep it completely apolitical, we can bring out the president. But I think Bibi, unfortunately, turned the prime minister's office into something more too personal.
Yeah, I think this whole, if we're doing the Talmudic analysis, as we said, I think the whole perspective is wrong, because when Natalie Portman was supposed to get the prize, and when she was announced as the winner, she was very proud and she was happy to achieve the prize. And by the way, Netanyahu was prime minister then for like 9 years straight or whatever, and he was investigated already on the corruptions. And anything else was in place already then. And then she was proud to get the prize. Suddenly today, she doesn't want to take it. Something changed. And the only thing that changed has nothing to do with the personality of the prime minister or with the result of the elections. It has to do with certain policies of the Israeli government, specifically the asylum seekers or the illegal immigrants policy to deport them out of Israel, and maybe events in the defense of Gaza. This is a policy issue. And Natalie Portman's act wasn't a political act; it was a act to oppose a policy move of the Israeli government. And therefore, I think it's wider than a personal issue with the prime minister or a political issue with the Israeli right. It's more of a wide disapproval of the Israeli policy, which I think makes it worse.
Look at the Independence Day celebration. Netanyahu came, but so did David Grossman. Now, no one can depict David Grossman as a Netanyahu supporter. He's a vehement Netanyahu opponent, an adversary. But he came. So the whole argument really sounds very hollow. And she sort of reminds me of these armchair liberals who prepare to defend their liberal values down to the last Israeli. So you really don't know what policy is objecting to. Does she want us to open the Gaza border? Does she want the country to be inundated by Sudanese
But by that
refugees?
same
What does she
token
want?
that you were bringing up earlier about how she's being used by Omar Barghouti and the BDS movement, does that mean that nobody can be critical of Israel, or otherwise we become pawns of the BDS
She could have
movement?
come out. She can write an article. She can give an interview. But actually, no one really knows what she's talking about. She's not being specific about anything except that she doesn't want to acknowledge the results of the election in Israel, which brought Netanyahu for the umpteenth time to be prime minister.
Why not attend the event and then donate to the New Israel Fund? Both.
For heaven's sake, she is a private person. I mean, what we are dealing now? We are discussing her motivations.
That's a cop-out,
what
Yossi.
happened?
She's not a private person.
It's
She's
really
a
a
celebrity.
joke. I mean,
She's
she
a
is
celebrity.
a very nice lady, and she doesn't want to come to an event because of Netanyahu, as I would not like to come to an event because of Trump, although I admire the United States.
But again,
So
I
it
think
is-
that it's not
it's
like
okay.
a Netanyahu-hosted event. It's an event hosted by the
Okay.
Genesis Prize that Netanyahu has historically
So she
been
decided,
to
because
anyway.
of whatever, not to attend it, and she has her liberal views,
to the
which she
delight of
expressed, and
Barghouti.
it is
as a
fine.
Much
yeah.
to the delight
I
of
just wanna-
Barghouti.
Barghouti may support anybody who is criticizing the government of Israel, which doesn't make the one who is delivering the critique
It's not
anti-Israeli.
criticizing, it's shunning.
Jacob?
Look, we can discuss whether we think, if she were consulting us, whether we think she should attend and speak out while she was attending, whether she had an opportunity to give a speech, which I assume she would if she was receiving the prize, and she could speak out at that. Would that go over, worse or better? Who knows? Perhaps it would have been a better idea for her to do that for her own reasons. And I think for us to really know, we would have to bring her on the show, and she would have to explain her own reasons. I think, though, her message is very important. She's not boycotting Israel in terms of where does she stand, and I think that's an important message. Again, whatever motivated her to make that decision, motivated her, and the only way to know that is to go beyond her Instagram post and talk to her.
So do you think it's even fair to kind of bring Omar Barghouti and how he views this into the picture?
Look, I completely agree with you. She's a celebrity, right? She is a private person, but she's a celebrity. People are only paying attention to what she's saying because her Instagram, she probably has, I'm guessing, well over 10 million followers on Instagram. I didn't check.
She probably has enough people following to
She's
get the
got a
word
big
out.
following on Instagram to make her a public figure. And celebrities, for good or for bad, are public figures. So why would our current political leadership care what she had to say? if she wasn't a celebrity. So they care what she has to say because she was a celebrity.
And now they will take her citizenship. This is the next retaliation.
Well, yeah, and actually, I kind of wanted to address that. You know, some of the reactions to Natalie Portman have been really kind of beyond the pale, calling her anti-Semitic, despite her quite extensive history of being pro-Israel, or at least engaging in what seem to be pro-Israel activities. So do you think Israel, these criticisms are going way too far and maybe hurting themselves and diluting the accusation even?
Well, I'm not a spokesman, even though I vote right. I'm not a spokesman for every MK member of the right. So I'm not gonna. I can't.
No,
can't
I'm
explain
not
it.
asking
I can't
you to speak
explain
for
this.
them.
People tend. I'll just
Rather,
say this.
I'm asking if you think that it's going a little too far.
I just say this: people tend to overreact to almost everything on both sides of the aisle. So now they overreact on this. People on the other side of the aisle overreact for like eggs thrown or whatever and other events. But I want to say something else about this. I think this shows us some kind of process that's happening inside of some of the Jewish elites, the Jewish Democrat elites, that they support Israel. I take her statement sincerely. I'm sure she supports Israel. But the Israel she supports and the Israel she dreams about is getting farther and farther from the Israel that's practical, the underground, that the Israel we have, because of political movements, because of maybe the right-wing governments winning elections more and more. There's a divide between their vision of Israel and between the actual Israel. And the progressive vision of Israel is getting farther and farther from reality. And I'm very happy with that because I'm against that vision. And what happens is we have people like Natalie Portman and like the donors of the NIF that they feel disconnected to the practical Israel, to the real Israel, and they put in a lot of effort to try to change it. Some of it I think is legitimate, some of it may not be. But we see this gap getting bigger and bigger, and this is the phenomenon.
But even if you don't like it, you have to take into consideration that it happens. And
Exactly.
if this is a fact, and there is such a gap, and if you care about the future of the Jewish people and about the Jews in the United States, you have, as a government, to do
what
something.
do you suggest, Yossi?
But
What do you suggest?
if you think the
not
government policy
rather to
I'd like to hear
ignore
the response, and then we'll have
No,
to
I
move
think
on.
I think
I'll
I think
tell you
I
something.
don't think we should ignore it at
rather
all.
than
So let's
ignoring
hear this one.
the gap, or rather than accusing all the time the American Jews who are not happy with what is
I agree
happening
with you.
here.
I agree with you.
What I'm saying that one has to take into account
I agree with
this
you.
when you take decisions,
No.
including the issue of church and state and whatever. All these things have to be taken into account if we are not just Israel but the Jewish state.
Can just finish my
I'm
argument
afraid-
because Yossi.
I'm afraid we really have to move on. I apologize. So let's go back to address what Portman might have been referring to, and specifically whether or not Israel really is standing up to Jewish values, as she said. So we'll start with the ongoing violent demonstrations on the Gaza border, for which the international community continues to come down on Israel. In fact, Nikolai Mladenov, the UN Special Coordinator for Middle East Peace, even accused Israel of not only exposing Gaza children to violence, but of attacking and killing them too. He made no mention of the 3,000 Gazans dropping firebombs and such by kite or catapult over the Gaza border, or of Hamas, who put these people in the line of fire to begin with.
اليوم أنا جايب أطفالي كلهم يجوا يتفرجوا ويلعبوا في المراجيح ويشوفوا الحدود الفلسطينية والأراضي الفلسطينية، ويعني إذا اليوم ما قدرناش إحنا ناخدها بكرة هم أولادنا حيعرفوا وين حدودهم وين أرضهم.
احنا بنعمل مظاهرات سلميه في الشارع، مظاهرات سلميه بنقعد هنا كليتنا، بنقعد زي ما انت شايف في الخيام، ما حدا بنزل ولا لا، حتى لو راحوا الشباب بروحوا الشباب كانهم سلميين، ايش في فيش في ايديهم شيء.
بندبها بنزين وبنحطها في الطبق وبنولعها وبنطرحها تجاه اراضينا الماخذين على الاحتلال. بنولعها وبنحرق القطن اللي بزرعوه وبحرق المانجا هذه اللي بزرعوها.
Okay, so after seeing that last video, is it fair to ask of Israel, is Israel living up to the Jewish standards after seeing things like that? Again,
That's a big question, but
Sure,
we can try and get into it. I don't know if I would characterize in the sense of Jewish values, because you're talking about a military conflict and policing issues, and we should, 70 years into it, doing a better job of translating what Jewish values means in terms of military and
How
policing.
about preventing a mob breaking over the fence and,
also
and
completely-
occupying
complete- no, I'm
occupying a Jewish community
Completely agree with
and
you.
butchering the
Completely-
residents,
completely-
raping the women, and razing the houses?
Sherman.
How's that for Jewish values?
Completely agreeing with you.
Good.
Completely agreeing with you. I think that we have gone through this several times over the past 20 years. First Intifada, second Intifada, in terms of trying to figure out both from a how does this get perceived around the world, and especially today, from some. We used to think about CNN. Today we've got CNN on steroids in terms of social media. So how does this stuff get sent around the world? And sometimes it's impossible to fight that. But we first have to figure out a policy as to how to prevent as much as possible, right, the bad things from happening. So if 3,000 people are amassing on the border, kind of what to do and how to project in advance.
Let me say something. Natalie Portman is a symptom of a far wider malaise. It's the malaise which involves Israel has allowed for decades for its image to be degraded and besmirched across the world. And I've really come to the conclusion that Israel doesn't want to win the battle for public opinion. Why do I say that? Because if you want to measure the motivation of an organization to achieve an objective, one of the most important measures is how many resources you allot for the achievement of that objective. Now, if you look how much Israel spends on public diplomacy, it's laughable. If Israel were to spend 1% of state budget on presenting its case forcefully and resolutely to the world, that would be $1 billion. With $1 billion a year, you can change a lot of minds and win a lot of hearts. And we have this ridiculous situation where liberals keep supporting the establishment of yet another homophobic, misogynistic, Muslim majority tyranny on
but
the
in
fringes
this
of Tel Aviv, and think if we do that, all our problems will go away.
But in this case, I think we're kind of addressing more the fact that here you have about somewhere between 15 and 20% of the world Jews living in the diaspora, and they're disappointed with the way that Israel
Because
runs
we're not
their
presenting
lives.
our case. We're not presenting our case. When the consul in
So you don't
Toronto
think that
says
Israel is
being upset,
handling anything
I
wrong?
think a lot of the anti-Israel sentiment and even anti-Semitism is because of Israel's
Is
dereliction of
misinformation?
duty.
Let's pass it on.
Well, there is also something about occupation maybe that contributed to our image in the world and the belief of the right.
In Gaza?
Everywhere, our image in the world. I mean, we are occupiers
We're
for
not occupiers.
51
we're
years.
not occupiers.
Okay,
We're
in
not
your
occupiers.
view, but in my humble view, we are occupiers. In the view
You
of
know what
many,
you'll see?
Dr.
Just
Sherman,
as well,
please.
we didn't take your advice
You
on
know,
the
Dr.
Golan
Sherman, can
or on
we
high,
please let him
just
finish?
on the Golan,
Can we let
because
him
then you
finish?
would have.
You know, when we taught in the same faculty in the university, we did respect each other, if I remember. So please let me say something about it. For 40 years, there are more or less rightist governments. Their main message was, you leftists, you didn't know how to present ourselves in the world. We have to invest in public diplomacy, go to the world, and tell them exactly what is the situation, and they will believe us because we will invest in it and will not give up. After 40 years to say the same thing,
They didn't
it's
invest.
a
They didn't invest.
They invest. I mean, Netanyahu is a public diplomacy
That's
from
not-
morning
that's-
to night,
that's-
and not only him. And it is impossible because if you are doing whatever you are doing today, and I'm not referring to Gaza, you know about Gaza, it is not
The Golan?
Right, but
we are occupiers of the Golan too. But
And
you
if you
didn't
weren't,
ta-
what would have happened?
you forgot it was a Syrian land. You
Sorry?
may say that now it is not the time, perhaps, to deal with it.
Ah.
But eventually,
And
it
if
will-
we have
it
Iranian,
will be-
if we have Iranian
it
troops
will
on
be
highlands over the Ben
evacuated.
Gurion airport,
Eventually,
okay, I wanna bring
it
it- I
will
wanna
be
bring over
evacuated. No,
Akiva Adli.
but the point here about Gaza is the stupidity. I cannot accept it that the startup nation has to play according to the script of the enemy and to kill people when it is possible
we could ask them
to
to actually
freeze them.
stop.
So do you think that there's a better way to be handling this situation?
Well, first of all, it's a good thing we're talking about a international public opinion
Sure.
problem, and not a big catastrophic terroristic problem. Maybe with maybe they hijack a place, maybe they capture people, maybe this could have gone way worse. So the idea, first of all, is handling the situation well on the military level, and I think that's not. I mean, we should appreciate that. Okay, that's on the first level. On the second level, of course, we can always do more to be more sophisticated. Maybe do more in public diplomacy. Maybe put out more videos on our side or whatever. But I think on the bottom line, we're behind on this, and there's nothing much we can do. not because Yossi is right, but because there's a majority of, I'll say, left-leaning in the media and in the West, and the Arab media is very strong here, Al Jazeera and other media outlets. It's very hard. It's very hard to fight them.
So you don't think that
even if we will have a stronger pushback, I think our chances of winning the hearts and minds are not that great as Dr. Shemerin
But
thinks.
would you also agree, at least to a degree, with diaspora Jewry, that there's much room for improvement, perhaps?
On what?
There's always
so that's
there's
my
always room for
question.
improvement, but the
Yeah,
diaspora
on
jury, they expect you improvement, and the way you deal this militarily. They like to see less shooting, less dead, less wounded, or whatever. I
I'm
think the
gonna do
IDF
that.
is practicing just great on that. I don't think there's no room for real criticism on that. And you can see also that because there's a strong stance on the border, and you don't let them play with you too much, so the numbers are getting lower from week to week. And I think in a week or two or three, maybe will be a few more dead, but we'll be over with this. And if we would have let them maybe come in, some of them pass the board and then play with them in our side or whatever, we'd see more and more people showing up every week, and then this would have become a strategic problem. Now I think it will be by a month or so we'll be done with this.
Final comments?
Yeah, I think there's being smart rather than necessarily right. I completely agree with you in terms of defending the border. I don't think anybody on any of within the political spectrum would disagree with you. But in terms of being smart versus being right, so the whole issue of however you want to refer to them, the 30 to 40,000 illegal Africans, mainly in Tel Aviv. So the question is, do you want to be smart or do you want to be right? So if you want to be right, you can say they're illegal. Let's drive them to the border and drop them off at the border and deport them no matter what. If you want to be smart, you say, how does it look for 40,000 Africans to be deported by Israel? Looks terrible.
How does it look for Ukrainians to be deported by Israel?
It looks terrible. So
It doesn't.
Huh?
It doesn't.
I'm telling you, 40,000 Africans, in terms of
Just the word
imagery,
Ukrainians.
Ukrainians. Ask about Ukrainians.
and I'm talking to you about 40,000 Africans, looks terrible. That's it. There's no way you can make it look better. So it looks terrible. So the question is, how do we deal with that situation and be smart rather than being only right?
Especially when there was a solution.
All right, unfortunately, that's all our time today for ILTV's Israel Weekly. Again, I'd like to thank our guests and to all of you tuning in. Remember to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras, and we'll see you next week.